Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Sendes. Agriculture is our wisest pursuit because it will in the end contribute most to real wealth, good morals and happiness.
Good day and welcome to Nation in Conversation from me, Theo Foster. At Nation in Conversation, we discuss pertinent issues that have an impact on our daily lives. Today we're going to talk about the complexity of the food value chain, the impact on the consumer and the changes in that value chain. You can follow us on Twitter at Nation Converse or visit our website nationinconversation.co.za. Joining me in studio today is Dr. Philip Tennyson from Computers Agricultural Economic Services and Neil Rust, Chief Operating Officer at Hinterland. Neil, I would like to start with you. The food value chain. What does that mean?
Theo, it's something that we have to get clarity about because there are a lot of people that confuse a value chain with a supply chain. Value chain is a string of companies working together in delivering a service that is being demanded by the customer. And in every aspect of that chain, with each and every supplier, there has to be a value that has to be added to the product.
If we take agriculture, where would you start the value chain?
Yes, the perception is that the value chain starts on the farm, but that's not correct. It actually starts one level below the farm with those people who supply the inputs that needs to be that you use to produce food with. That's where it starts. So all the seed, the fodder, the fertilizer, animal products, everything that the farmer needs to produce food, that is where the value chain starts. And from there on, everyone in this chain add value until it reaches the consumer, and he's actually the end user where the value chain stops.
So if I walk into a high-end store and I buy something, some food stuff, there's actually a long process there, but that also determines that my behavior drives this whole chain. And that is a challenge for the value chain. What is the dynamics of that changes in the value chain?
There, I think it's important to understand that we have quite a shift in demographics and urbanization over the past couple of years. If we look at urbanization, that middle class change of 30 to 40% over the past 10 to 15 years. There's a move away from maize meal as a staple food to the ordinary type of product that you would get out of a supermarket.
And that means there's a complete change. Let's talk for a second about food security and the demographics. What is the picture in South Africa?
Well, to go with that, with the behavior patterns is also the urbanization of the population in South Africa. The more people who live in cities, the more you have to distribute food and to transport it, and that also need to be changed throughout the whole value chain. There's not that a close connection anymore that the consumer can buy directly off the farm. So there need to be a chain, there need to be all these different aspects, and the unfortunate thing for the consumer is all these values that you have to add, the distribution, the marketing, the cold chain, it costs money. So eventually the food will be more expensive when the consumer buys it as when it leaves the farm. So there's a whole shift. As the urbanization goes on, you will also have a shift in the cost of the food chain.
I would like to just for a second, before I get to the margins in the value chain, you a supplier to the primary producer. That means as the primary producer and that part of the value chain changes or adapts, that means you need to adapt your business to service that value chain. The challenge in terms of that?
It's very important for us, Theo, to have close relationships with our input suppliers. Reason why I'm saying that, if we look at the National Development Program, their targets for the year 2030 is that we have to increase our food supply with 50%. How will that be able to achieved if we only have 1.6 hectares per population member in this country at the very moment, with hectares being lost to mining and for whatever other reason, we will definitely see a reduction in hectares to something like 0.95 per population member. That is going to put a huge pressure on every member in the entire production chain.
But we actually have a history of efficiencies specifically on primary production.
That is correct, but also to add what Neil is saying is that at the moment there is about 36,000 farmers in South Africa, and they have to feed the 53 million people in the country. That means that one farmer have to supply food for 1,500 heads of the population. And as Neil said, we are going to lose some valuable agricultural land to mining, to this urbanization, because you actually have to buy farms for this whole urbanization process also. And with that, in 20 years' time, one farmer, and the farmer also, the number of farmers decrease, so we will end up in 20 years that one farmer have to supply food to 2,200 people in the population. So as Neil said, there's huge pressure on farmers, but on the other hand, farming and the food chain, from the suppliers, from people like Neil, they are becoming more efficient. So I'm not too worried that we will be able to supply this whole food chain with enough food.
After the break, I would like to focus on the efficiency, specifically how efficient we were on the primary production side. And then in terms of a value chain, there's margins in that value chain. And there's pressure on certain margins, and margins needs to be managed. And I would like to talk about the margins in the value chain. Nation in Conversation will be back after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Today we talk about the food value chain. Philip, I want to take the discussion when we talked about primary producers. We have seen tremendous increases in productivity on the primary production side, haven't we?
That's correct. And we have these gradual growth in productivity that's always there. But then also sometimes we have these huge jumps in productivity, as was the case when Roundup Ready cultivars came on the market. That took us a bit forward, but if you can just compare with what happened 150 years ago, in 1850 it took us 4 working days to produce 1 ton of maize. In 1930 we've increased that to 1 working day. In 1990 it took us 1 hour and 10 minutes to produce 1 ton of maize. At the moment, with no-till and all the new technology, we are down to 12 minutes to produce 1 ton of maize. So we are making progress, and we are keeping up with this whole food chain, the demand on the food chain.
And that specific increase in productivity, the whole food chain had to be in line with that to get that to the consumer. What happens in terms of this value chain, in terms of this chain that starts with input finance or inputs that ends up on the shelf? There's various margins on that chain, and there's a balance needed in those margins in terms of negotiations, in terms of offtake agreements, in terms of who earns what for doing what. If that margin goes wrong, what is the effect of that?
Well, everyone in this chain has to do his bit. And you have to build an economic relationship between these different levels of the food chain. If that goes wrong, and this is my personal meaning, but we saw it in the wheat chain, we saw it in the dairy chain, that connection broke down. So we don't have that good food chain anymore. We had it with dairy and wheat, but the moment those economic relations start to go wrong, and you don't build on that, and you don't respect the other guy's margin that he wants to take in the food chain, then it can go wrong. And as you see with dairy products and even with wheat, then you have a shift to the import market, and then actually you give away quite a big chunk of the whole food chain to foreign countries. They now can create the profit that is built in, and we are losing that.
I mean, some people, some big farmers would criticize and say we shouldn't follow the UK example where the retail store owns the value chain in terms of margin. But that the government also plays a role in the price if you look at this margin, and bread is a prime example.
Absolutely. The gross margin on a loaf of bread is R1. Value added tax on a loaf of bread is R1. So government must understand what role they do play in the price hike of food.
And that is a great example from the farmer to the end producer and how that line is built.
Absolutely.
If we look at the aim of and I want to get back to the National Development Plan, if we look at the aim in terms of job creation, and you bring that in line with the fact that farm laborers are becoming more schooled, but there's less of them needed, where does that leave the value chain, the creation of jobs, the plans of the National Development Plan?
Very important remark, Theo. If we look back in history, 25 years ago, we had 1.7 million people involved in primary agriculture. At the moment, we have slightly over 630,000 involved in that portion of the business. The National Development Programme's aim is by the year 2030 to increase jobs by 1 million in the sector. What we have to understand is that National Development Programme focuses on producing 50% more product or food, and that has to come from land which has been irrigated. As we know, currently 68% of water being used in South Africa is being utilized in producing food on the land. Water is the one and only commodity that is being used right throughout the value chain in every little link of the chain. Water is very important in South Africa, which is a scarce commodity.
That's going to put pressure on that commodity, however you want to achieve the aims of the National Development Plan.
Absolutely. We also have to bear in mind that climatic circumstances which we are facing at present could well lead to warmer and drier situations in countries like India and South Africa, and countries like Canada and Russia, where it's going to become warmer. They're going to have better production situations. So what we have to bear in mind, India has got 53% of their land is arable land. South Africa, only 12%, of which 3% is very fertile soil.
That's an incredible challenge for the South African farmer. Add to that some of the political challenges we have. How will the farming community look in the years to come?
As Neil said, the government also plays a role to create the right environment for this whole food chain to function within. And we can't play around with political models like land reform if it doesn't work, if it doesn't add value to this food chain. So then it will just add to all these challenges that we already have. So other countries have the luxury of more arable land. We don't have it. We are giving some land away to mining, to urbanization, and we can't afford to play around with models that doesn't add value to the value chain.
Neil, how are we going to get the traditional or new farmer into the formal value chain?
Smallholder farmer has a huge challenge to be incorporated in the formal agricultural sector. For starters, finance is most important. Land Bank supplied 20% of the credit for production facilities in the country. Commercial banks, 50%. Agricultural companies, businesses, between 13 and 15%. What does the smallholder farmer have to offer as security to obtain a loan? And that is the challenge that we have to face with. And I think it is at that process, that stage, where government has to play a huge role in supplying the right platform for those farmers to be involved in the formal sector.
After the break, I would like to look at the future. What changes are there? What challenges are there? And what's our options in terms of managing those challenges? Nation in Conversation will be back after the break. Welcome back. This is Nation in Conversation. Philip, in terms of this value chain, obviously there's factors that play a role that's outside of necessarily of the control of the participants. One of these is imports, there's subsidies on imports, but also the exchange rate. How does that fit into the value chain?
Theo, they say that the exchange rate is a result of the political value of your country. So the politicians have to play their part as well to make the environment where we can function in as friendly as possible. We pay the price at the moment because, as we discussed earlier, the bottom level of the food chain is the primary inputs, and a huge amount of that is imported. So with this current weak exchange rate, that inputs are going to be more expensive, and that will go through the whole food chain. Now, unfortunately, the farmer is the one who is squeezed between, because the farmer is a price taker, is not a price maker. So if the price is too expensive at the consumer side, then the whole price will be, that increases will be squeezed down to the farmer. And for this value to keep existing, as we discussed earlier, the economical relationships has to be there. So everyone in this chain has to be economically viable to continue with this whole chain.
Where it breaks down is where one of the participants, and you alluded to 2 or 3 industries, is being squeezed to the extent where it's not economically viable anymore. And the exchange rate plays a role in that.
That's correct, yeah.
Neil, one of the challenges looking forward is water. South Africa is a water-scarce country, and there's a challenge around that.
There's a huge challenge, Theo. We use, as I've said earlier, between 63 and 68% of water has been used in the process of producing food. The National Development Programme stated that, as I've also mentioned earlier, that they want to create an additional 1 million jobs in agriculture, and that is by utilizing irrigation as a method. Worrying factor, reason being, with land reform that has happened over the past couple of years, we have experienced a 90% failure rate. If we're not going to have a very solid economy, not very volatile, you will not get investment from commercial farmers, that will definitely put a huge burden on the entire production process for food security in this country.
Philip, in terms of the value chain, and I want to, in terms of your experience, farmers, we're seeing more and more farmers extending their business into the value chain. And there I mean feedlots or mills or even into different product lines. If you look at the farmer, a primary producer, extending his footprint into the value chain, from your experience, are they successful, and what are the critical factors for those that are successful?
It is very difficult for a single farmer to add value and to go up higher in the food chain. But they can do it through his agribusinesses, where he's a member of or a shareholder of. They are actually the best positioned to add value to the farmer's product, keep the product closer to the farm as long as possible, and then, if you can say it, release it to the markets. Then the farmer can indirectly benefit from this whole process by bringing those other levels of the food chain closer to the farm. That's definitely a possibility, but it is very difficult for a single farmer because it's just too capital intensive to do those kind of things.
And it takes time to come to fruition, and if it's purely a link to a single farming entity, the risk is too high.
That's correct. And with this whole consumer-driven market at the end. You have to establish brand names. You have to establish good distribution networks, dealer networks, and that just get beyond the farmer's reach. But there's definitely possibilities, and there are agribusinesses that is doing that with a farmer's product, and I think that is the way to go.
Neil, the major challenges, we've talked about water, we talked about land reform, the opportunities in the value chain. Would you say that given where we are now and where we're moving towards, we know that the demand from the consumer is going to grow, we know that the behavior of the consumer is going to change. Does that create opportunities in the value chain?
It absolutely creates opportunities in the value chain. What we have to understand that we are at a medium risk at the moment when it comes to food security in this country. And for specific reasons that you have the poorer of the poor use about 50% of their salary to get themselves nutritious food. The challenges will have to be faced by government. Government will have to come to the party, but I'm very positive that we have a country where we have shown in the past what we can achieve, and likewise, I'm looking forward to the challenges ahead of us.
Philip, a final comment from you. Do you think we are in a position to provide food security in the long term?
Well, if we play our game right, we are. We are at the moment around about 50% that our chances are to provide our own food. Above the Limpopo River and beyond the Sahara Desert, Africa can't do it. They are, if you look, they are the biggest part that cannot provide their own food. North America and to some extent South America, they can do it. We are in between, and we can go either way at this moment. So if we cherish our agriculture, all that's involved in the food chain, we can do it. But if we play the game wrong, the whole food chain can go wrong.
Thank you very much. I think it's a discussion that we will have to continue. I think the value in terms of the underlying discussion is that if there's any of these parties is not in balance, you see what happens in the world. And I'm talking about if there's no food on the shelves, but either so if the primary producer cannot supply into the value chain, and also if the price negotiations in this value chain is out of balance. Thank you very much. You can join the conversation by visiting our website, nationinconversation.co.za, or follow us on Twitter @NationConverse. Next week, we will look at unique South African products and the protection thereof. Please join us again. From me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK, and Senvis.
The world is changing today. The world is changing in every way. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better. No matter where